Right. Still,
Okay, so finally, we had some technical issues, but here we are. Yeah, Eve Lorgen is back, as you can see, and we will talk today about what it is like if your life is being handled by a dark Cupid. So, welcome, Eve.
well, thank you for having me back. It's been a while, and so I'll just share, what new stuff I'm coming across and what's been going on. And as opposed, this topic really, I think it's thousands of years old. When we talk about like the whole dark Cupid or the alien love bite, or when you feel like a relationship is being run by something else behind a partner or the both of people, where it's just beyond chance. And so I run into that more with clients who have more of the darker side of it with a partner, or sometimes they get set up as someone. So it depends on what angle we want to take. And I could say, I know we didn't want to mention names, but in the world today, there's been recent events, let's say last September 10th in 2025, of an assassination on stage of a very um, charismatic, good character who had more of a Christian view, a male, and I won't mention his name, but we don't need to. We'd figure it out anyway. But the ideas are um, questions arose in people's minds as they were observing over time people who were close to him, who were of faith and had actually investigated and studied things like Project Looking Glass and some of the more woo-woo conspiracy things that are now well known, actually, in a lot of the circles. And that, was there some kind of interference in a relationship where there was a handling going on, what we call a handling, but really is it a dark Cupid setup from an earlier time because some forces knew at some point a person who, I'm going to call them the original pure ones, okay? Because I run into some people who have more of that quality. Certainly not all of them, but the ones who might be feeling that they have a special mission or destiny, they're called by God, or they have a strong faith, they're very charismatic, they're influencing people in a positive way, telling the truth, influencing children in a good, powerful way. Then a lot of times those people are set up with partners in a supernatural way, we'll call it a dark Cupid, where over time, you can only see it in hindsight, and that's kind of the problem, I think, in the people that I've seen over the years. Most of these things were discovered in hindsight after the fact, after they might have been with somebody or married with somebody for a while, or dating or a partnership. So some of them were short-lived, but more often than not, it was something that was learned in hindsight after a healing and recovery process of a lot of awakening, you know? So I believe that these things continue to happen and that there are red flags and that we can identify it and that there's certain people that I think are more targeted than others. And that's why I call like the pure ones who are having a good influence on people, where there seems to be a supernatural thing going on. And if people knew what to look for, they might be able to stop it before it has its ability to destroy someone's destiny. People actually come here before birth, and they actually have a special destiny by God, you want to call it, or something that they just feel really strongly in their soul. And then they find themselves like in these situations where they feel like they're being targeted or shunned or supernatural attacks on their life, that kind of thing. So I think that's what happens, and that the dark Cupid is classic for certain people who tend to be targeted over and over again. And sometimes there's different types of quote dark Cupids and alien love bites, which we've talked about on your show before. But the ones that I find that are more fascinating are the ones with people who are, I'm just going to call them the pure ones, who have come in, their soul is stronger or their spirit has more light and they have more awareness. And those kind of people have, they will have the awareness and the lucidity that bypasses, the average person, so that they're able to perceive more and, pick up on it and know when something's happening, when like the ordinary person will be like, eh, how do you know that's for sure? You can't prove it, but inside your soul if something's not right. So I take those things seriously because I think that had not these people come to my attention who are the more aware people, we would not have been able to piece things together in the way that we have over the years. And now we could say, oh, we can identify this. Like in psychology now, there's so much more known about, let's say the dark triad, psychopathologies, and narcissistic personality disorder, and narcissistic abuse. And then even more so, like from my book, the ones that are hosted by a malevolent demonic spirit or a familiar spirit or some kind of mind control program. Now there's more identifiable traits that we know now that could save people, gosh, years and years of suffering or even early deaths. So that's why I think my book is important and it continues to be very relevant and these reports don't stop.
Yeah.
So I'll just pause for a minute if there's any interjection you want to take this because it's a big subject, you know?
Yeah, I found it interesting that you said it's thousands of years old. Actually, it appears in Greek mythology. And according to Ovid, Cupid had two types of arrows. One had a golden tip, and the other ones had a lead tip. So when you were shot with the arrow that had a golden tip, then you created uncontrollable desire. But if you get shot with a lead tip, then you develop very strong repulsion. So
Oh,
that is what happened to Apollo. Cupid shot Apollo with a golden tip, but Daphne,
oh,
the nymph that he fell in love with, he
oh,
shot her with a lead tip. So
oh,
she was completely repulsed by Apollo.
oh,
And that is why she transformed into a laurel tree to
oh.
escape his advances.
Gosh, you know more than I should have put that in my book. I didn't know that part. But I'm sure there's many variations, which makes you wonder, some of these, well, I don't know, demigods running around doing things. And I think some of it's for the game playing of the loose feeding they do anyway, to create emotional attachments or revulsions or, obsessions. And I know that that definitely took place with people who witnessed this in alien abduction type of scenarios. And funny, one of the things that had come up, it's in my Alien Love, the Love Bite book, which by the way, I'm working on a second edition with expanded more material. But in that book, there was a woman, I think it was Angelina, was one of the case history people, where she was being abducted not only by the human military in a MyLab project, but also would have, sometimes the Greys would come and then the reptilians came a little bit more often, and they were often associated with the military as if they were working together, which I think they were. But one of the things that I don't know if it was the reptilians who did this to her because they were very possessive. They tend to be possessive over their people that they sexually want to have relations with or assault, or sometimes they do this in a way where they raise your sex drive to an unnatural degree. They might raise the kundalini. They make it so it's like almost irresistible to sexually respond to what they're doing into your body and to your energy body. But one of the things that had happened to quote Angelina was that this reptilian would repeatedly basically rape her and have sex with her, and her sex drive would just go through the roof. And then she would be set up in these love bites with other human men that weren't her husband, by the way. But then with some men, especially with her husband, they did something so that she responded in a like with revulsion, his quote pheromones, so that he just completely and utterly turned her off. And it was like when she would smell that smell around him or any other male, she would just have this instant revulsion where before it just wasn't present. It's like they were able to manipulate that. So it almost sounds like, the dark arrow of Cupid where, you just have this repulsion and it's like innate in your
Mhm.
body. Like this pheromone thing goes off where you just like you just know,
Yeah. I
that would
think
happen, you know?
yeah, I think in these mythologies, I'm not saying they are true in the literal sense, one on one, but they always have a kernel in them, that is that you can still observe today. And so after all these years that you have been working with people, and what would you say if you had to boil it down? What are these dark Cupid relationships designed for?
Sorry, I have allergies and it's nonstop around here. We have a lot of pollen in South Carolina. Uh, let's see. So if we wanted to summarize a more succinct way of being able to observe red flags of a dark Cupid, in my experience, they tended to happen to either innocent kind of people who tended to be more the pure one type, and they may or may not be involved with any kind of alien abduction history or being in a secret project or MK Ultra or a secret space program or in a family system of Illuminati or whatever. Sometimes they're just like the pure ones who get involved in a relationship with a psychopathic personality type that's hosted. Usually they're hosted, because it's what's driving them. And then that relationship turn out to be very vampiristic, and a lot of times supernatural things will happen where they'll have invasive dreams that feel like demonic in nature, or they can't extricate themselves energetically from the partner, even though they broke up with them or they might be miles apart. Even thinking about them or reminders send them into these states that they feel like they're being psychically attacked, like as if these people have some kind of ability to psychically attack you from a distance, like the vampire who's hosted or whatever. So that's one type, and where that the vampire personality can have more of the narcissistic dominator qualities of manipulation, but they also may have a lot of sexual charisma and have abilities to be really good in bed, basically. So that's one of them. And usually there's a high drama. They get together quickly. And a lot of these kinds, it's a fast romance, and then there's a lot of dramas, ups and downs, and fights and chaos, and sometimes violence. And sometimes the supernatural things will actually manifest when you're with that person. You'll see their face change as if there's like a demonic, contorted look on their face, or, they can see the overshadowing of a reptilian, or their eyes turn black, things like that. Or just entities in the house when you're with them, then you're just starting to have a lot more paranormal activity. So that's the one type. But more often than not, the people that come to me based on my early abduction research, really it was about people who've had ET sightings or UFO sightings and alien encounters and those histories. And then people with those histories tended to have more relationships that tended to be set up or interfered by whom they believed to be either their alien visitors and handlers, or sometimes it seemed to be some spook, military intelligence agency that were humans in these clandestine secret groups or cult groups, even like CIA family groups and weird shit. So those people tended to have more of those experiences and then being set up with partners that were being manipulated in some way. So a perfect case in the love bite, well, that's an obvious case, was the Mia Adams and Jordan, who was the FBI agent who he basically had a alien love bite engineered with her, but he was sent as an FBI agent to investigate her. But one of the reasons why he was sent to investigate, this is a long story, was because she was doing UFO alien abduction ET research because she had had experiences. But apparently, some secret group that was connected to his FBI unit, which were really above that level of authority, a lot of times they were Department of Navy or they were intelligence people who already knew, and they were already tracking families of people who they knew were already alien abductees. And they thought that the already, quote, hybrids who have alien DNA or something. And then they would be sent to be investigated or neutralized because they're spreading too much information in the public domain because they're investigating and they're just wanting to find out the truth about their experiences. They don't even know, they may not even know they're quote hybrids or genetically modified or whatever. Sometimes they don't even know who they are. But others are apparently following these bloodlines and trying to keep track of them. And if they become too loud or too much of a influencer in some way, then they send in someone to neutralize them or throw them off track with a love bite, right? So in that case, it was actually a love bite, but he didn't realize it because he was already under mind control because he was actually one of these abductees who was in a project before he was born. And then he was, um, I think, manipulated or engineered and conditioned to actually seek employment with the FBI because he was already being handled all his life. So it's kind of a spooky thing when you dig really deep, you find out, well, what came first, the chicken or the egg? A lot of times, you were born into it because you were already engineered into it, and then you were molded and conditioned to do a particular job with an alphabet soup agency or military industrial complex, FBI, whatever. And then they find out later when their memories come back and they start investigating that they're like some alien human hybrid freaking experiment and then being set up. And so it just goes so much deeper than what you think. So those kind of cases, they're more obvious, like where there was an involvement with an alien abduction or an alien abductee or someone who's sent by, who's in a family with FBI, military industrial complex, family system people tend to have higher influence. And I think those kinds of people in powerful families or organizations are watched and already handled by many forces that I think are related to these higher cult groups that control governments and religions and medical and entertainment industry, what it call the Illuminati family controlling systems of this world that are run by these false gods, Anunnaki, Reptilian, Draco, Greys, and different factions that these cult families tend to ally with. So it gets really complicated, but once you get the signature of this, it's pretty easy to like see and actually predict what will happen.
Hmm. So, in other words, if I understand correctly, if you have been targeted for whatever reason to be in a dark Cupid relationship, then you can bet your head on it that someone outside has an interest that you are being handled, correct?
Yes, I would say so. Or the handling is like a claim, like some
Mhm.
kind of claim has been claimed over you. And sometimes this happens through the bloodline. Let's say parents, grandparents might be in a secret society or a military, or their bloodline people have been abducted for generations for some reason. And then they seem to be under a type of claim or watch by certain alien groups. But then at some point, it seems like there's human groups who ally with or know about these abductions, and then they get involved on another level and watch the people or handle them or try to get them into a project like, we were talking about Project Looking Glass, for example, or the Montauk Project, or some of these other projects where the human groups who are allying with these alien groups who worked with these families for generations, now they want to get involved and do their own little separate experiments and projects. So it kind of complicates and muddies the waters. But in general, those bloodlines tend to be watched because there's a claim over them already through these groups, through some kind of contractual oath or covenant or ownership that many they're not really aware of. Like, well, who owns this planet anyway? Who's really running the show and in certain bloodlines, and why are certain bloodlines targeted? So that brings like a spiritual question, really is like, okay, someone's claiming this bloodline. You could be just born into it, and it's like not even your fault or anything. You're just born into it, or you might have a special, unique skill or gift or genetic signature that's of interest that another group might want to test and build skills so that you'd be an asset, like in a secret space program.
Hmm.
So, but I would say that there's always some kind of claim or interest by an alien group first, and then you'll have the human groups who are in these what I call the secret society occult blood oath covenants with the quote false gods, whoever they are that are more trying to claim certain human bloodlines and have been for generations. So sometimes it's a matter of, if you want to become free from that, you have to kind of determine that in your own awakening and healing process by, connecting with your own spirit, your own connection to God. And I think through Christ is more powerful. And then that's the process of awakening where those things start coming into your memory, your awareness. And then you realize, okay, in my case, it's been going on in generations that I think. And then at some point in a particular in history, there was an additional group associated, let's say, with a government or a Freemason group or a secret space program group where there was an additional claim on you. So I think the aliens and the other gods, whoever these beings that have been going on for millennia, are always the ones who are the earliest form of handling. And then, the later groups just kind of piggyback onto that by their alliances with them. So that's how you find out. You just kind of recognize that you always feel like your life's not in your control. There's always an interference, or seems like there's curses on you, or, the abductions or the weird things that happen are always getting, set up with some kind of psychopathic or narcissistic kind of person that tries to control and dominate or manipulate in some way where it's not a healthy relationship. So, the question is, well, how come? How come? This is what I ask. Well, how come such unhealthy, friggin' dysfunctional relationships have been normalized for a long time in history, especially to women in general, or in certain cultures, it's normal for women to just be considered, let's say less than. They don't have as many rights. They're just devalued by nature. Women and children, orphans and widows. Older women, divorced women, they're always just less valuable. You get paid less. You're just not worth that much. And that's the assumption that goes on and hidden. This goes on for how many thousands of years has this devaluation been going on? This is what I like to study as a woman. There's a secret history going on. And this is what would be really good to investigate, but I don't know if I have time for investigating a female history of this realm and this planet and throughout what happened even before major religions had got their root and why so many systems seem to devalue and dominate the woman or women and children, widows, single women, divorced women, and children, the pure ones, the ones that are easy to dominate, because you dominate a planet by taking advantage of those people first. So trafficking of women and children tend to be the way you can dominate probably a species more easily. And then the belief systems which encourage their devaluation and their it's so hard to get free when you're devalued and you can't work for a living unless you prostitute yourself. Like in the old days, how would women even make a living unless they were dependent on a man? So you had to get married, you had to have children to have some value, or you're just, a nothing. And then you have to beg, then you have to prostitute. So, like, who started that? Uh, have you ever asked that question? Because there's so many relationships that are just normalized in this completely toxic or unhealthy way that doesn't assume equality and equal value and complementarity. So, accept people who've done psychotherapy, family therapy, marriage and family counseling, certainly in certain cultures where we're having to problem solve conflict and marriage and family problems because there's a problem. Well, we can't get rid of the problem if the belief systems and the culture of the system creates the belief systems that people believe that, well, you basically really don't have as much value. So why are you complaining? You should be lucky you even have a morsel to eat, you know?
Mm.
Like they make you feel guilty for having any human needs at all, or even having equality in your complementarity as a woman. So, you know, you have to ask the question, well, why has this been normalized? Why is dysfunctional abuse normalized? Because I could tell you in these family systems of, let's say, the Illuminati family systems and some of that cult stuff, or even in a lot of these alien abduction families where there's not a full awareness that the abductions are happening. So what happens is because of the amnesia and the trauma, more often than not, they basically program you or so post-hypnotic suggestions, maybe in abductions, to not remember, not talk, because if you do, X, Y, and Z will happen. You know, you will get sick and die. Something bad will happen to you. We will take, I've had this happen to me where you talk, your family's going to get killed and we're going to kill you. We're going to give you cancer. And they did give me cancer. I'm a living example of what they've done.
Mm.
So I'm not here to be all victimy about it. It's just that in our history, there has been a normalization of dysfunctional, toxic relationships and devaluation of women and children and older women specifically, and divorced women or single women, and, you know, men too. But we have to take that out at the root. The root is narcissistic abuse is normalized, and that's a problem because that's how you control and dominate an entire species. So we need to root out all aspects of narcissistic abuse so that we can restore our true power and our true value to have peace and harmony. But when I see, you know, people who come to me who've had these dark Cupid or alien love bite or their, you know, interference, weird stuff going on, when we look at their family system, we see that these things have often been going on for generations or have been normalized, but more so if they were one of these bloodline families of Illuminati families or military industrial complex or, you know, generations of military families or generations where they had alien abductions or you know, like the fifth generation super soldier kind of thing. So there, you know, you could start seeing how it plays out and where it's going when you read some of these or hear some of the testimonies now that are coming out that, you know, I think I would go overboard if I said too much because I just posted on my Alien Love Bite Telegram channel 4 interviews that I found that is a fifth generation super soldier female named Jarusha. It's not her real name. And these were from like 2 and 3 years ago. And I didn't even find these interviews until the other day with Dan Duval, who runs a healing ministry for many survivors of cult abuse and like high level weird stuff that he's discovering all the time. So it's good that people are now coming out with much more details about technologies and methodologies and on-world, off-world, interdimensional, all this other stuff that really wasn't known like 20 years ago. People just didn't know. But when you see, you know, how they create these people through generations and what they've done to date and how they operate in controlling and manipulating relationships to be basically handled and controlled. And it's always some narcissistic abuse crap, almost always. In fact, like when you look at mind control, like a Manchurian candidate, for example, um, or anybody who's abused, it's always, you know, narcissistic abuse is the way to control and manipulate and erase someone's identity and their history and turn them into a puppet who's taken over by the dominator who has the virus, right? So they turn people into the puppets of the virus. And that might be another way of looking at it.
What do you mean by virus?
Some people, like I think the Native Americans, they called the Wetiko virus.
Let it go. Mhm.
I never really studied that in depth. I heard the term over and over again. But what I see is often there is kind of like a virus, and it's almost like a an infected thing
Ma-
that gets in your system. Like once you have, like sometimes once you have like a love bite with like a really psychopathic and like demonically hosted or like a really bad like psychopath narcissist type, even if you didn't have that in your family system of origin, which can leave you vulnerable to getting that. And we know that, like as therapists, like, oh, well, if you had a parent who was a narcissist, sometimes unless you've done all your recovery and self-discovery, you just kind of end up in relationships with abusers later in life because you just don't know any better. You just keep attracting them. But sometimes that's not the case. Sometimes you just get one of these and then it just throws you into this spell of like the whole gaslighting thing, right? Where you start questioning your perceptions and your reality, and pretty soon you don't know who you are and what you want anymore because there's always someone who's like mind messing with you to be what they want you to be by erasing, they create confusion. So it's confusion of how you're really feeling and what you're really believing and who are you really? So they try to basically erase and confuse your original identity. And then by doing that, well, they could erase your memory too. Because when you become confused, you'll say, well, I remember this happening. Oh, no, it didn't happen. No, no, you said this. And then they erase your memory of history. And pretty soon you become so confused because it's an energy vampirism operation. So when your energy is sucked out of you, you lose your perceptions and your awareness. You become like more and more like an empty shell who gets taken over by the programs of the abuser, where they say, this is who you are, this is what you like, this is what you don't like. And you pretty soon you just like you think you just believe what they say. And this part of the whole Stockholm syndrome thing. And I
Mhm.
think people are being engineered even subtly with aliens. I know this whole Stockholm syndrome thing, because if it happens from birth, when we talk about our recovery from trauma is the fight, flight, freeze, fawn, our coping responses to survive, which is natural for a human, or dissociation so that we can handle reality by, compartmentalizing this horrible event or a feeling so the body lives. Because a lot of people who can't handle the trauma and don't have those gifts of dissociation, mind you, they turn either schizophrenic or they die at early death or they have failure to thrive as an infant and they just die. The kids just die. Okay. So that's just our human, how we're built to survive trauma. So that's why trauma recovery can take so long to actually recover. Well, what is my true identity? Before all this happened, who was I as I came in this incarnation without the program overlays of a shame abuser who tries to condition you to, you are not this, you're that. You won't be loved unless you do this, that, and you become a slave to what they tell you what your identity is. So I think this is going on in many, many ways on a continuum. But the whole Stockholm syndrome is dangerous because that's the end result of really not knowing or believing you're safe and that you have to do what the abuser or the controller says you are in order to survive. It's actually a fawn response. The Stockholm syndrome really is fawn. And that means you can't survive unless you please the abuser because otherwise you'll be dead. And there's no other option. So I think this happens on a subconscious level where people are basically praising the abusers, or let's say whether they're the Anunnaki or the alien greys or the reptilians or whoever who might be messing with people. Um, I think there's a lot of the Stockholm thing going on. That's a deep trauma response um, that makes the message is you're not really safe. Therefore, you must do what they say. You must do what they tell you what you are. And so the fighters like Dr. Carla Turner, right, and Barbara Bartholek, and many, many researchers, where they figured these things out, like on deep levels. They were horrendously attacked, obviously, by the groups that are already being compliantly controlled to carry out those agendas. And then, well, you know what happens, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a long story,
Yeah.
right?
So, I mean, that is. a horrific ordeal if you have been captured by a dark Cupid because of all the narcissistic abuse that goes along with it. So, do you have any suggestions how to detect early warning signs so that
Yeah.
you might have a chance to escape a little bit earlier because that is actually what it is, escape.
Yeah, and it's hard to know when you're young. I
Mm,
mean, especially if you've come from a history where you didn't even know, like in my history, I didn't know. I mean, I knew I was abused. I had a father who was a narcissist, terrible, Freemason, the whole nine yards, but I didn't know the extent of the shame and the normalization of just being disrespected all the time by like a male figure. And to me, it was normal to be basically kind of be a fawn response person to survive. And then so you just attract people who just take advantage of you or use your energy and don't take you seriously. And you don't know until you're in pain all the time or until you get really sick that, there's something not right with this equation, right? So, but the red flags would be someone who basically just disrespects you. And I think there's ways that they actually test you. And there's some really good people out there who are doing YouTube videos. They don't even talk about the alien stuff, but people like Chase Hughes, who's an extremely intelligent person. I think he used to work in the intelligence field, where he talks about like the five behaviors you should watch if you're being disrespected, the things that you should never tolerate, the signs that someone might be a psychopath, and how you manage to get out of those situations before they even have a chance to get a root or a foothold in a relationship. And so I think they do test you in different ways, where they'll test by kind of doing like a humiliation thing, maybe on a date where they test your boundaries and see how far they can go to dominate, even with like wanting to set up another date and you give them like, well, I'm free on these days, and then they keep trying to do another day at another time, and they keep pushing what they want without respect to what you just said. They're testing your boundaries to see, well, how far will you just back down to do what they want? Or they'll openly humiliate you or not show up or just, or try to get you jealous and like really dumb, stupid things. It's amazing what they do to see how much abuse and disrespect you can take. And then they'll know how easy you are to manipulate. Um, but yeah, just not taking your feelings seriously, not really being interested in your hopes and your dreams and your feelings, and never even caring like if you're sick or if you're sick, they punish you and they passive aggressively make you feel guilty when you're really sick or things like that. Well, I mean, if you start noticing paranormal things, obviously there's the bad dreams and the psychic attacks and they're the normal things that I talk about in my book where you can see the red flags, the high chaos drama, and then, being physically drained and maybe you're really confident before and you had a good job and you had a degree and then, within, years of the relationship, you lost all your confidence and you can't feel like you can't tell the truth or you're going to get in trouble or they're going to punish you and feeling like you can't talk about things like things that you're not happy about in the relationship because they're going to passive aggressively punish you for bringing anything up and they'll make it all your fault. So you have to keep more and more and more isolated and never really tell the truth to them because they avoid conflict, they avoid open discussion, and they will avoid the truth. And then they'll make it your fault when you bring up something that you're not really happy about, and you have a preference for this. You can't communicate in a normal way. So this is why, like, how many years later I figure this one out? I do compassionate communication skills where like with normal people who aren't like narcissists and psychopaths and hosted freaking whatever, normally you would be like, well, yeah, I'd like to bring up, something that happened the other day. And I just like to say that, when I noticed something happened, like an observation, and you kind of had a feeling about this event that took place, and you try not to do it in a blaming way. We try to do it in a a level, rational way, and, observation, feelings, and then the needs underneath that are really underneath the feelings you had that were uncomfortable because of something, an interaction that happened, sometimes in public, sometimes in private, and then a request so that, next time, this happens, would you be willing to just, not say anything to the people at the dinner table about, a medical issue I have or about things that, sexual issues between us or whatever it is, if you try to do a natural communication process with one of these people, they won't allow it. They will ridicule, they will make you wrong, they will, insult you in front of people sometimes. So you could never have a real honest discussion of equality and respect. So that means conflict can never ever be resolved. So that what happens is all these unresolved conflicts and hurts that that something's not right, they build, build, build inside you until you're living in an emotional concentration camp and you become under more and more pressure and you get more and more drained because you could never get a resolution to an issue because they always have to be in dominance and control. So that's why it builds, builds, builds until you start getting sick or bad shit starts happening, or maybe there's more paranormal things that happen. Because what I noticed, even in my own life, the more that tension built, the more negative feelings and the more stuff that never can get resolved that builds this black cloud like inside you and in your home, right? This tension, you can cut it with a knife. And then that builds the negative abduction. So the more negative beings would come in and interfere and access because it was like ripe for you become ripe and vulnerable when you're in these negative or feeling powerless emotional states in a relationship with a narcissist or a handler or a dark cupid. So that's how they keep you handled so that you always have this dark cloud or crack in your reality that's always accessible. It's like a decreased immune system for, bacterial invasion.
Hmm.
That's how they keep you powerless because you can't resolve it. Like with normal people, you could resolve conflict who actually love you and actually respect you, but it's not possible for a narcissist to love or respect someone.
Yeah.
They they might respect someone they fear, but there's never real love because their identity is not even based on something true. So this is where, I have to say, I just still think there's more going on a spiritual level that many people talk about, but it might be pointing fingers in a way where we don't want to claim that some people are NPCs or they're what they used to call the Hylics in the Gnostic literature, the clay people, who are like, well, something's not there. There's something in the human body, but somehow that spirit in them is not awakened or not connected, and they're run by something else.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree totally. Um, Also, what you sometimes can observe or experience, let's say you are with an alcoholic, yeah, you're married to an alcoholic, and that alcoholic at one point, I guarantee you, will tell you, you are the reason because I'm drinking.
Oh yeah. You're the reason why I have to drink.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Because I was from an alcoholic family.
Ah, okay,
I
good.
know that quite well. And the normalization of alcoholism. And I think that's why it's so hard to recover, even as an adult child of an alcoholic. If you don't drink, a lot of times all the social circles and even the family system connections were built around alcohol and the socialization of alcohol as being a normal aspect of life. And so when you want to disengage from addiction behaviors, you can lose a lot more than just quote the alcohol. I mean, you could lose your friends and you lose the relationships or the quality of relationships because many are not willing to stop those addictions. They still think it's normal to get drunk every night and just get dementia early and wonder why they have all these health problems and they're like freaking pickled and they're going to die early deaths as a result of alcoholism. I've seen this happen. It's like really sad.
Yeah,
So it's hard to quit addictions. And I think that's why, when we recover from trauma, there's so much more than just the trauma or the addiction that you're trying to stop, because you have entire socialization and trying to get your needs met through groups of people who have normalized this addiction or these addictive behaviors. So, I mean, this gets into like learning how to get your human needs met in a healthy way and reparenting yourself, and it's really hard to do if you never really got your human needs met in a healthy way. If you're
Yeah.
from an alcoholic family, like of course you didn't get your needs met. And that's why you like had problems as a teenager and might partied when you were in your 20s and just like were a basket case or something until you
Mm.
realize, oh, I got a problem, and then you have to go to therapy. But learning how to get your needs met with healthy people. So like recovery is about, okay, we need to change. We need to stop something that's bad for us, but we need to engage with healthy people and healthy groups so that getting your needs met, your social needs met, your all these different needs that many we don't even realize we have because we denied them or we're denied them. And that's why there's an addiction, because you're always in pain, because you feel cheated or you feel like, impoverished all the time, or you never feel loved, or so learning how to get one's human needs met in a healthy way becomes the biggest challenge, I think, in recovery. And that's why, support groups are so good. And I think prayer groups are really helpful if you find the right groups of people and, social things that are healthy, things that feed your spirit, feed your soul, feed your body in a healthy way. And so that takes disengaging sometimes from, the primary relationship that might be a dark Cupid or a family system that's like really dysfunctional. And
Mm.
that's hard to do if you're like married to someone and then you always having to deal with the in-laws or, or a family system situation. I think that's how humanity is so handled, is that they they mistake loyalty for love of truth. And they give loyalty a higher priority than love of truth and the truth of love and what is healthy versus unhealthy.
Mm.
And this is where I think there's a scripture in the Bible. And this is, I think, why Jesus said, it was, I don't know, somewhere in there where the people with him are saying, oh, your family, your mother and your sisters are here asking about you. And he makes some statement about, well, my true family, the true family of God, are those who obey the commandments of God and basically do it. Those who are aligned with the Father, basically, which would be righteousness and goodness. And so I think the reason why people have trouble in their recovery process is that they have higher loyalties or bonds and soul ties with people who don't have healthy ways of living and functioning, and that they want to keep those loyalties out of, maybe they're expected to. In certain family cultures, you're expected to, keep peace with the family, even if the family's all dysfunctional and they've got the drunk person who's molesting the kids during the holidays or whatever. And so that's where it's like our values of what's the most important thing must be that which is healthy and good, healthy love. And that comes back to ethics. And, that I think it went back to the basic Ten Commandments or the righteousness and the Jewish tradition and the early Christians, where it's a certain way of living and being, which is the highest value is your relationship with God, really, where you came from is really should be the highest priority within a healthy system that also values that, so that we don't get pulled away to basically not be our highest destiny. And our highest destiny may be something other than a dysfunctional family system. You know what I mean?
Mm. Mm.
Or a
Mm.
dysfunctional whatever system that's valuing something else over the truth and over love and healthy love. So I think we're dealing with that in the world, like a lot of these controlling systems in many sectors, their priorities are mixed up. Um, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's least to say the least.
Yeah.
They don't
So,
know what healthy really is. What's true health and harmony?
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, loyalty is a double-edged sword because on the one hand, it's a very good thing. On
Yes.
the other hand, if it is not, as you say, rooted in goodness and in truth, then it can become, yeah, very destructive because there is a point in you where you know that I
Mhm.
am supporting something that is wrong, that is harmful, that is destructive, but I do it because I feel obligated to that person. And if I don't do it, I might lose my job, I might lose my status, I might lose this and that and the other.
Yeah.
And yeah, so then you're in one big mess.
And that's how they control people. I mean, I know if you don't do this, you can't get medical care. And if you don't do that, then you'll lose your relationship and you'll be homeless or and so a lot of people are actually tortured like in the programs like the mind control
Mm.
programs. A lot of times they want to get out. They don't want to do that. They don't want to hurt people. They don't want to assassinate people. They don't want to, a lot of them they don't want to do it. And then they're tortured or with something worse so that they feel like they don't have a choice and they take the lesser of the evils just to get away from being tortured. So it takes quite a bit of strength, I think, to break free from some of these family systems and programs and governments or whatever these ruling organized crime organizations and families that I mean, how many doctors have had to you know, not keep their Hippocratic oath because of pharmaceutical companies that own medical research.
Yeah,
And that's really sad. That's just really sad. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So, Eve, we have reached the top of the hour, and yeah, we will see the patrons on the other side. And I would like to go a little bit deeper into this blueprint that we as souls bring with us into when we come into this world, and if free will is an illusion, and on and on. So we will see the patrons on the other side, and